Hello and welcome to session 270 in the AISafety.com reading group. Tonight we'll be discussing the first half of my objections to We're All Gonna Die by Eliezer Yudkowsky, and this is written by Quentin Pope. Quentin Pope is not publicly writing who he is. This is his image from Twitter, and I assume it's because he's cared about his privacy. I did in fact manage while I was looking him up to get a good picture of who he is, but I think he would prefer privacy. So we are unfortunately stuck with this picture that I'll be used as attribution for his claims in this presentation. And Eliezer Yudkowsky, of course, prefers to be called decision theorist at MIRI. I don't think that is what I would actually say he is, but that's what he prefers. This was published a month ago on Less Wrong, and we are taking the first half, ending before Quentin Pope describes the part where more people are more optimistic than Eliezer Yudkowsky. So first thing is I want to say thank you to Quentin Pope, because I think critically examining these the arguments are a really valuable service, and it's really important to dig into and even adversarially try to question the assumptions and try to find weak points, because that is how we get to truth. And I think it can be thankless work, and well, I want to say thank you. The criticism that Eliezer Yudkowsky has gotten from this, from his podcast on Bankless, has been Quentin Pope notes that it's been on an outside high-level view where it doesn't really argue against him in any kind of specific way, and Quentin Pope agrees more with these people, Tyler Coven, Robin Hanson, than he does with Eliezer Yudkowsky, and he wants to provide some inside view arguments against Eliezer's points. In particular, the criteria he uses for what arguments to investigate are the ones he disagrees most with. And of course, when I see this podcast on Bankless, that's 16,000 words, and there are just a lot of claims. So I don't actually think Quentin have chosen the right methodology, the right procedure for figuring out what claims to engage with, because I think he should have engaged with the claims that Eliezer Yudkowsky explicitly flags as important. And the two parts that I see as most important, and that I think Eliezer Yudkowsky think is most important for why alignment is such a deathly problem, the fact that it's we only have one try and we don't have much time. That's the kind of arguments that I think are really, really central, and that's the thing that I wanted Quentin to engage with. And perhaps not even choosing list of lethality instead of a podcast transcript would probably also be wiser. So the way that this is something I reuse for a lot of skepticism, that there is a sense probably that Quentin and many others have that a lot of the points in Eliezer's writings are wrong, and this gives rise to a broad and shallow criticism of many of these individual statements that Yudkowsky is coming with. And this is in turn something that people react with hot takes and saying more irrelevant things, and that means that Quentin Pope can't really respond to a hot take in any good way, and we don't get any kind of synthesis out of this. And this is the overall inadequate equilibrium that I believe that the AI safety skepticism is mostly stuck in right now. And of course, I should also point out that this is my opinion, and if you count by which posts gets upvoted by less wrong, this is wrong. Like if you investigate one argument, you'll get very few upvotes. If you try to give this big picture disagreement, this shallow big picture disagreement, you'll get a lot of upvotes and less wrong. Finally, Quentin Pope says he will endeavor to not use his own research on shard theory as the argument why Eliezer is wrong, because most people are not that much into shard theory as Quentin Pope. But I actually find that a lot of the arguments that Quentin Pope are making does in fact rely substantially on the intuitions from shard theory, or that, like, from how humans form their values. So the first question is, will the current approaches scale to AGI? And Yudkowsky apparently thinks not. And that was in fact what he was saying before GPT-4 was announced. He hedged it a lot. Like he does that in general. Like after GPT-4 was announced, then of course he updated and said it's smarter than he thought it would scale to, and then of course afterwards this criticism hit. I don't actually think that Eliezer Yudkowsky still believes very strongly that you can just scale it up and you will get AGI, but more believes that there is something hidden somewhere still yet to be discovered that will in fact be the key that will unlock some kind of foom. And Quentin Pope is actually even more optimistic in that the current paradigm he believes may very well scale to superintelligence. And I don't actually have a good intuition for this. My point with this is just that, like, if Quentin Pope is more bullish on the current paradigm, then that seems like something that should increase the probability of doom. And like if we are seeing when the loss curves go below the human level or trying in different ways, it looks like it does to me seem like the very longest timelines, like Eliezer have argued for, seem totally unreasonable at this stage. So while AI is scaling, will the alignment work that we are doing continue to scale alongside? Quentin Pope is very optimistic and reasons historically saying that when capability advances work, they typically integrate well with current alignment paradigm. I disagree, and I would like to bring out this old post by Scott Alexander, which has a graph saying that more people are killed by falling furniture than by terrorism. And the reason why you get this very counterintuitive result is because you start counting on September the 12th. So you don't actually get September 11th. And that means you get some like really, really misleading statistic. And my point here is it matters very much when you start. And I started at like the opposite time, in the sense that I started just when we had this relatively big framework that completely relied on mathematics of utility functions. And then the deep learning revolution happened, and all the alignment work that had been done to this point, all the technical alignment basically vanished. It was completely demolished and didn't integrate at all with the current paradigm. So I'm not saying necessarily that Quentin Pope is wrong, but it depends very much on when you start to count. And I think it is further complicated by I guess Quentin Pope and I would have differences of opinion about what is capability and what is alignment research. And this is just simply difficult. Quentin Pope makes a claim that the capability advances that we're going to see in the future, they may not break the existing alignment techniques. I think that is probably true as long as we stay narrowly within the same paradigm, but it's almost certainly going to be false when we get something dramatically more important. Like eventually we are going to find something better than autoregressive language models. Like I can't see us using this in 3,000 years. Now we get to the discussion of generality, and I want already here to highlight that I find this really difficult to pass. I think the description that Eliezer uses is in this podcast is not very good. He has written better in many other places, and going into this is really difficult. Is to me it's just a really difficult subject, and I actually don't think generality is the best framing of what the actual problem is, but that's what we're using here, so let's roll with it. Eliezer says that if we were full general, we would be as good as at programming as we are at catching and throwing things, but we're not, so we're not perfectly general. Quentin replies that we're not really spec for throwing in any meaningful sense. We just have a general learning algorithm and then bias that toward learning how to throw. So if I should say, like, this is really vague, my intuition is that throwing and catching an object is actually really, really difficult in some kind of objective sense, and humans are really good at it, and the things that are required for coding seems like things that somehow in a information theoretic way or something like that is actually easier, and humans are just really bad at them. I don't actually think this is something that influences the probability of doom very much. Like, obviously, if you think that humans are optimal or close to optimal or near some kind of ceiling or anything like that, that could be an argument why we should have a lower probability of doom based on this. But as far as I can see, Quentin Pope does not really make the last step towards the argument that this is why we should have a lower probability of doom. That is a discussion about brain architecture, about like how simple and general are transformers compared to the brain. And we found, evolution found the human brain by chipping at flint axes, and we find transformers by language models, but they can do basically everything both. And I try to see, like, from this, can we try to get any kind of information or intuition about how likely it is that there is like a possibility that the language models can become dramatically more general soon, rapidly, in some kind of form. And I think that Quentin believes, based on this, that it is unlikely that we'll get some big step of generality. But I couldn't like connect the dots really from Quentin's writing, unfortunately. Yeah, that's a different. I won't go into this. I will instead talk about the idea that AI can be more general than humans. In Eliezer Yudkowsky's argument, you could imagine an AI just rewriting itself, reprogramming itself to become better at coding or something like that. And Quentin believes that actually powerful cognition comes from simple learning processes applied to complex data. And that's a reasonable disagreement. I would just flag here that Eliezer, in his description, says you can imagine something, and Quentin makes a much, much stronger argument that a powerful cognition mostly comes from. And I think in this case, because Quentin is making a much, much stronger argument, he needs to provide much better arguments, much more evidence for this statement. There's some discussion about, like, humans can reprogram themselves if you define reprogramming as obtaining new training data. I don't think that's actually how most people think about reprogramming. If I think about reprogramming, like, I think about an AI designing a new AI, and in the limit that would be something like, Matryoshka brains and some provably optimal Bayesian reasoners and things like that. And I think in that case, I do in fact believe that this kind of reprogramming is something that is possible and is something that is potentially extremely powerful. The hosts in the Bankless podcast ask, what is a superintelligence? And Eliezer Yudkowsky says it's something that can beat any human and the entire human civilization at all the cognitive tasks. Quentin Pope objects that this is too high a bar. We may get something dangerous substantially earlier than this. I don't actually disagree very much with Quentin, but I would like to point out that Eliezer Yudkowsky is answering the question, as far as I can see, in the totally standard accepted way. But I agree with Quentin that the thing we actually care about, I don't know if this is an agreement, is below this, and I believe in particular it's the 6 strategic cognitive tasks that Bostrom identifies that are important. But I think there is some kind of generality here in that I expect all 6 of the tasks to be solved at roughly the same time, because each of them have been optimized with roughly the same amount of human cognitive effort. This may in fact be a total nitpick. I don't know. I am going back and forth about whether this is actually an important point or not. What I would in fact say is that between this slide and the previous slide, Eliezer Yudkowsky has been talking for several minutes and going through some of the arguments that I think are more like core. And I think Quentin, by choosing to engage with this point rather than some of the others, is stepping substantially away from the core arguments for AI Doom. Now we get to the width of mind space. This is an old picture that Eliezer Yudkowsky made, I think, back in the early 2000s or something like that. And that comes up as the answer to the question, why would an AI not be like us? And Eliezer Yudkowsky says that the space of minds is very, very wide. Quentin objects in very strong terms. This is extremely misleading because real-world data does not look like spheres in any meaningful sense. I think at this point, Eliezer Yudkowsky is just talking about like the space of possible minds, and I think that could, in fact, reasonably be a like a space in some higher dimensional that is like continuous. There are obviously some limits to it, but I think in general you could imagine very, very many kinds of minds, and no reason why this space would not be like continuous. Quentin suggests rather that we use a different reference class, and the reference class that Quentin thinks that we should think about is the space distribution of powerful intelligences that we could build in the near future. And that's, of course, depending on how strong your model are for how does that look, in fact. Like, in the limit, if you have a really strong opinion that it's going to be GPT-5, then it's like a distribution with 1 point. Quentin says that this is more useful for estimating the distance to the human mind. It's not really clear to me. Notably, building an AI that is like a human mind is something that to me seems like we are very unlikely to do in the near future. So that means that like then we punt the question to like how human-like is GPT-4, and from that question we want to figure out like how human-like is GPT-5 going to be, or the version of GPT that will eventually be of substantial strategic interest. I don't think that reference classes is in fact a good way of looking at this at all. Like on the outside view, you can't really say very much. Like you need to actually look into GPT-4 to say anything really interesting about this, and to get any kind of knowledge. Like reference class forecasting is something that I expect to fail dramatically in this case. Also, this mind space is wide is something that an argument that Eliezer used back before, certainly before the deep learning revolution, and we do in fact now have some evidence. Like if we try to just train an autoregressive encoder on common crawl, what do we in fact get out of that? We know that now, and we know that we get something that seems clearly unaligned. And we've tried a number of variations on this, and we get something that is unaligned, like obviously unaligned. Or we're doing reinforcement learning from human feedback because it's clearly unaligned. So in that sense, the default expectation, if you just build an AI as a generative pre-trained transformer, you are going to get something that is unaligned. Next topic is strawberry alignment. The idea that the task of copying a strawberry is something that we don't know how to specify in a way that doesn't involve the world being irreversibly damaged. This is also something that Quentin objects to, in the sense that the question seems malformed to him, in that humans can't be made to only care about one thing. Excuse me for a moment. So it's obviously not one thing that Eliezer Yudkowsky is talking about. It's two things: copying the strawberry and not destroying the world. And not destroying the world is actually a reasonably complex and thick thing. Sorry about that. If you try to specify this in more details and think about that, and the question becomes, if you also add in alignment with human values and something like that, and tries to get it aligned in a stronger sense, does that make the problem more difficult or less difficult? Quentin is arguing that we don't even know if a value formation process exists that allows you to specify that you don't just want to copy a strawberry. Quentin argues further that we have one value formation process that we know is compatible with our values, and that is of course our own, and why would we not want to use that? And I think this is close to the core of my objections to Quentin's overall thoughts on alignment, because I don't think that we actually want an AI that is anywhere near to a human. We want something that is corrigible and not something that is human-like in any meaningful sense. The orthogonality thesis, as given by Bostrom, is that intelligence and final goals are orthogonal, can be combined in any way, and Quentin is arguing that there is no orthogonality thesis for alignment techniques. This could also be stated as not all alignment techniques work for all final goals, which I think I basically agree with. Deep learning is an example where we have a much easier time instilling a behavior if we have a lot of examples of this behavior. That is certainly true, but I'm not entirely sure that it is in fact alignment. This instilling behavior seems more related to capability and less true to my conceptual understanding of alignment. Precisely what is alignment and what is making the model do as you want is an open question. I haven't really seen a good description. Clearly a number of people thinks that reinforcement learning from human feedback fits into this, and I think most people would also agree that reinforcement learning as it was done back in the 1970s by Minsky and things like that, that was probably not alignment research that they did. But what precisely is alignment is an open question. Quentin further argues that superhuman tasks, they are the things that don't have any kind of examples, and that means that this kind of behavior is not this kind of alignment by reinforcement learning on this doesn't really work. I think it's a problem of capability, and we are not talking about alignment here at all, because eventually we will have AIs that is capable, in fact, of doing things like duplicating strawberries, and they will also be capable of taking over the world, and we want them to duplicate strawberries and not take over the world, and that is a problem that we will need to solve. Quentin also has another statement here that makes me think that he and I have a different conception of alignment, in that he doesn't want an alignment method that lets us turn a language model into a paperclip maximizer. I see that as like a capability issue, and like to me it's very, very easy to turn GPT-4 into a paperclip maximizer. You literally just give it a prompt and say, you are a paperclip maximizer, what action will you take, and then you do that, and then you have a paperclip maximizer. So this is a problem. Whether it can become a paperclip maximizer that is actually able to make paperclips is a question of capability only, and not really alignment. Will AIs be steerable by gradient descent? A counterexample is perhaps natural selection, which Eliezer says it maximized inclusive fitness, but did not really cause us to care about inclusive fitness. Here is an example of like how I think of it in like meme form. Here is a potato chip, and here is a curve that you can navigate on with gradient descent. And if you have a really strong model in this 3D space here, that is something that is very unlikely to generalize. For instance, if you want to generalize to taste, then you are not going to get, even if you have a perfect representation of a potato chip, you're not getting something out that actually tastes well. And in the same way, I feel Quentin disagrees and says basically that we have no way of knowing, and this example that Eliezer Yudkowsky is giving tells us precisely nothing about like how difficult is alignment going to be. I think at a minimum it tells us that inner misalignment is possible, because having like one example of inner misalignment is something that certainly is some kind of evidence. I don't think that Eliezer Yudkowsky actually cares very much about this argument. He doesn't think that gradient descent is the same thing as natural selection. So I feel Quentin Pope's counter-argument here kind of misses the mark a little. I think Eliezer Yudkowsky would not find that they're talking past each other to some extent here. And Eliezer Yudkowsky is in some of the next sentences talking about what he thinks is actually really important and what his core argument is. And again, that's what I feel Quentin should engage with, rather than with things that are kind of like this, but that Eliezer Yudkowsky actually thinks are quite different. How about the example of humans liking ice cream? That's, according to Eliezer Yudkowsky, an example of value misgeneralization, when we shifted to a modern environment where we could have ice cream. And Quentin here has a long alternative description of how this came to be, how humans came to like ice cream. It looks mostly identical, I think, to what I imagine Eliezer Yudkowsky would write. I think one of the difference is that Quentin's description, it routes explicitly through that you have to actually eat the ice cream to figure out that the ice cream tastes good. And I think this is an assumption that just obviously fails for a more capable agent. I think a superintelligence would not, in fact, need to eat an ice cream to figure out that it tastes good. Quentin Pope similarly has a suggestion for avoiding this problem, that it's just we won't reward the AI for taking bad actions. And like, I'm confused here. This is like like misgeneralization is a problem when we get to a new domain, like going from training to deployment, where we can't just choose not to reward the AI because it may have taken over the world. So I am confused here, and I won't probably talk that much about it. Eliezer Yudkowsky speculates on the inner goals of a GPT-like model. He says, I don't think GPTs can have any sorts of inner desire. And Eliezer Yudkowsky says they might in fact do. I notice here one thing that he said in the podcast that that Quentin omits from his summary is that he's talking about GPT-like models and says like things like GPT-7. I think we should have a, like, I don't know at what points we get substantial inner goals. Where do we get meta optimizers? I think my intuitions about what is going to be happening inside GPT-7 are extremely weak. I think Quentin would need some kind of argument for why he thinks there will be no inner desire in GPT-7. I think it's really, really hard to say anything with any kind of certainty about that. Quentin notes that GPT-4 doesn't seem to have like an outer desire for simplicity. It doesn't want to be asked simple questions. And that is of course true, but it still seems like goals are possible. So it must be possible for a stronger version of GPT to in fact have goals. The example he uses is humans. We have an inner goal, that is we want to predict visual stimuli, and asks, have you ever even once in your life thought anything remotely like, now I'd like to sit in a dark room? And I would in fact say that yes, I have thought about this. I do every night think, yes, now I would like to turn off the light. And I think also I have thought this quite conscious in response to overstimulation. Like, now I need to like leave the party for a moment and just go to the bathroom and put some cold water in my eyes and just relax. Like, this is, I think, quite normal. But of course, these kind of inner processes haven't really taken over me. Like, in general, the outer goal is what is stronger for me. Like, the argument that this never happens, I think, is wrong. I think there are, in fact, a lot of humans who have these kind of inner processes that have taken over, like in cases of addiction or like mental diseases. I think the strong claim that this is a thing that literally never happens is almost certainly false. That is all for today. Thank you and see you in 2 weeks.